In October 2024, the European Union introduced a right to repair law, a rule designed to give car owners full control over how they fix and maintain their vehicles after purchase. The idea was simple. Once you buy a car, it should truly belong to you, and you should be free to repair it anywhere, using any parts that meet proper standards. But almost immediately, real-world cases began to test this idea, especially through rebuild projects shared online by creators like Armstrong, who has shown millions of viewers that even the most complex and expensive cars can be repaired outside official dealer networks. His work has made people question long-standing beliefs about manufacturer control and has opened the door to bigger discussions across the entire supercar world, including brands like McLaren, where repair restrictions, expensive parts, and limited access to technical information have also been common concerns among owners. This combination of new laws and public rebuild projects has created a powerful moment of tension in the automotive industry. On paper, the EU law promises freedom, lower costs, and more competition. It clearly states that customers should not be forced to use official service centers and should not lose their warranty just because they choose independent repair options. It also targets the long-standing issue of manufacturers controlling spare parts, especially visible components like bumpers, lights, and body panels, which are often sold at very high prices through official channels. The goal is to break this monopoly and create a fair system where independent mechanics and third-party suppliers can compete. But as strong as this law sounds, the reality is more complicated. Manufacturers are not openly ignoring the rules, but they are finding ways to keep their influence. This is where the real conflict begins, because what looks fair in legal language does not always feel fair in practice. And when we look at real cases, like the situation involving a Bugatti owner named Alex, the question becomes much bigger than just one car. It becomes a test of whether ownership truly means control, or if it is still limited by the companies that build these machines. Even with a strong legal foundation in place, the behavior of manufacturers shows that the battle is far from over. Companies have not openly rejected the right to repair law, but they have adjusted their approach in ways that allow them to keep control without clearly breaking the rules. One of the most effective strategies they use is the idea of conditional benefits, especially extended warranties. At first, this seems helpful. A customer is offered additional coverage beyond the standard warranty, which can be very valuable when dealing with high-performance cars that are expensive to maintain. But this extra protection usually comes with strict conditions. The owner must agree to service the car only through the official dealer network, use only approved parts, and follow the manufacturer's guidelines exactly. Technically, this is still a choice because no one is forcing the customer to accept the extended warranty. But in reality, the situation feels very different. When you own a hypercar worth millions, the thought of losing warranty coverage creates a strong sense of risk. Even a small issue can turn into a massive repair bill, and that fear pushes most owners to stay within the manufacturer's system. This is how control is maintained. It is not direct force, but a carefully designed environment where the alternative feels unsafe. Over time, this behavior reduces the impact of the law, because people are still making decisions based on fear rather than freedom. This pattern is not limited to one brand. Across the luxury car world, similar systems exist, whether it's Ferrari, Lamborghini, or Porsche, where official networks remain the safest and most trusted option in the eyes of customers. But not everyone accepts this situation quietly. Some individuals begin to question whether this kind of pressure goes against the purpose of the law. They ask whether true ownership should come with real freedom, not just limited choices that feel controlled. This is where the story moves from general industry behavior to a specific and important case. A Bugatti owner named Alex decided not to follow the usual path. Instead of relying on official channels, he chose to rebuild his car independently, knowing that this decision could lead to conflict. His actions are not just about repairing a damaged vehicle. They represent a direct challenge to the system itself, raising important questions about whether the rights promised by law actually exist in real life, or if they are quietly shaped by the power of large manufacturers. Alex's situation begins with something that should be simple and clear. He legally bought Bugatti through an auction, and the ownership was fully transferred to him without any special conditions attached. In most normal situations, this would mean complete control. When you buy a product, especially at such a high price, there is an expectation that it belongs to you entirely. You can repair it, modify it, or choose who works on it without needing permission from the original manufacturer. But in the world of hypercars, things are not always that straightforward. As soon as Alex began planning the rebuild of his damaged Bugatti, he started facing problems that went beyond normal technical challenges. The manufacturer did not openly support the project. Access to parts was limited. Technical data, which is essential for complex repairs, was not easily available. Instead of cooperation, there was silence and resistance. This created a situation where the rebuild became more than just a mechanical task. It turned into a test of how much control a manufacturer still holds after the sale is complete. From a legal point of view, this raises serious concerns. European competition law is designed to prevent companies from creating monopolies, especially in areas like repairs and maintenance. If a manufacturer refuses to provide parts or blocks access to essential tools and information, it can be seen as anti-competitive behavior. This is important because the right to repair law supports the idea that independent mechanics should have fair access to everything they need to do their work properly. Without that access, real competition cannot exist, and the market becomes controlled by a single system. Alex understood these risks from the very beginning. That is why he did not treat the rebuild as just a simple project. He involved legal experts early on, making sure that every step he took was carefully planned. This approach shows that his goal is not only to fix the car, but also to challenge the limits of manufacturer control. At the same time, stories from the online automotive world, especially rebuild project highlighted by Matt Armstrong, have already shown that even highly complex cars can be successfully repaired outside official networks. These examples add weight to Alex's position, proving that independent work is not only possible, but can also meet high standards when done correctly. As the rebuild moves forward, the situation becomes more intense because it starts to shift from theory into real, visible results. At the beginning, manufacturers like Bugatti can defend their position by focusing on safety and complexity. They can argue that hypercars are not normal vehicles, and that only specially trained technicians within their official network have the knowledge and tools to repair them properly. They can say that independent repairs are risky and could lead to serious problems, both for the car and for anyone driving it. For many people, this argument sounds reasonable because these cars are extremely advanced and built with precision engineering. But this defense becomes weaker as the rebuild progresses and starts showing real success. If Alex's Bugatti is repaired step by step, if damaged parts are replaced, systems are restored, and the car begins to function again, then the idea that independent repair is impossible starts to fall apart. The moment the car runs, drives, and proves that it can perform as expected, the entire argument changes. It is no longer about what might happen. It becomes about what has already been achieved. This is where things become legally dangerous for the manufacturer. If they try to block access to parts or information, and yet the rebuild still succeeds, it raises an important question. Why was that resistance there in the first place? Was it really about safety, or was it about maintaining control over a very profitable system? These questions become even more powerful if the finished car is inspected and shown to meet proper standards. At that point, the rebuild itself becomes evidence. It shows that independent repair is not only possible, but can be done correctly. This creates a strong foundation for a legal challenge, because it shifts the focus from assumptions to proof. Instead of debating whether something could work, the discussion becomes about why it was prevented when it clearly does work. That is a much more difficult position for any manufacturer to defend, especially under laws that are designed to promote fair competition and consumer rights. As the situation develops further, it becomes clear that what is happening is much bigger than one rebuild or one disagreement between an owner and a manufacturer. If Alex decides to take legal action after completing the rebuild, the case could create a powerful precedent that affects the entire high-end automotive industry. A precedent is not just a single decision. It becomes a reference point that influences future cases and shapes how laws are applied. In this context, a strong ruling in favor of the owner would confirm that right to repair laws apply equally to all vehicles, whether it is a small everyday car or multi-million-dollar hypercar. This would send a clear message to other major brands like Ferrari, Porsche, Lamborghini, and McLaren that they cannot rely on exclusivity or technical complexity to avoid legal responsibilities. It would also give confidence to car owners across Europe, many of whom currently feel that challenging a large manufacturer is too difficult or too risky. A successful case would prove that the law can work in practice, not just on paper, and that even the most powerful companies must follow the same rules as everyone else. On the other hand, if the case does not go to court and is instead settled quietly, the impact could still be important but less visible. Manufacturers might adjust their internal policies to avoid future conflicts, possibly making it easier for independent mechanics to access parts and information without publicly admitting any wrongdoing. However, this kind of outcome would leave some uncertainty, because there will be no clear legal decision to guide future situations. Either way, the pressure created by this case is already forcing the industry to think carefully about how it operates. It highlights a key issue in modern ownership, where advanced technology and strict control systems are changing the relationship between buyers and manufacturers. This is no longer just about cars. It is about how much control a company should have after a product has been sold, and whether true ownership still exists in a world where access to parts, software, and data can be restricted. A key to the heart of this entire situation is a simple but powerful conflict that keeps growing as the story unfolds. On one side, there is the idea of ownership, which most people understand in a very basic way. If you buy something, especially something as expensive as a hypercar, you expect it to be fully yours. That means you should be free to repair it and modify it, or choose who works on it, without needing approval from the company that built it. On the other side, there is a reality of modern manufacturing, where companies try to maintain control even after the sale is complete. They do this through technical restrictions, software systems, limited access to parts, and carefully designed service networks. In many cases, this control is not obvious at first. It only becomes clear when an owner tries to step outside the official system and finds that doing so is difficult, expensive, or unsupported. This is where tension begins to build. The right to repair law introduced by the European Union was designed to reduce this imbalance and give power back to consumers. It says that ownership should include real freedom, not just a legal title with hidden limitations. But laws alone are not always enough if they are not tested in real situations. That is why cases like Alex's Bugatti rebuild are so important. They turn legal ideas into real-world challenges that cannot be ignored. When an independent rebuild succeeds, it shows that control is not as absolute as manufacturers sometimes suggest. It proves that alternatives exist and that skilled individuals can achieve results outside official systems. This creates pressure on the entire industry to rethink how it treats customers after a sale. At the same time, public attention from automotive communities and creators, including figures like Armstrong, helps bring these issues into the spotlight, making them harder to ignore. The combination of legal change, real-world rebuilds, and public discussion is slowly shifting the balance. It is forcing people to ask a deeper question. Does ownership still mean full control, or has it become something more limited and controlled by the companies that build products? As the situation moves toward its final stage, it becomes clear that this is not just a technical rebuild or a simple disagreement about parts and repairs. It is a much larger question about power, control, and the meaning of ownership in the modern world. If Alex continues forward and decides to challenge a manufacturer legally, the outcome could affect not only his own case, but also the entire structure of how luxury and high-performance cars are maintained and repaired across Europe. The key issue is whether manufacturers like Bugatti can continue to influence what happens to a car after it has been legally sold. On paper, ownership means full control, but in practice, many systems still keep the original company deeply involved in repairs, servicing, and access to information. This creates a situation where the buyer technically owns a product, but may still depend heavily on the manufacturer for its upkeep. The right to repair law was introduced to reduce this imbalance and ensure that consumers are not trapped inside a single system. However, laws only become meaningful when they are tested against real resistance. That is why this case is so important. If independent repair is proven successful and legally protected, it could encourage more people to challenge restrictions that they previously accepted without question. It could also force manufacturers to rethink how they structure their service networks and how much control they keep after sale. At the same time, the wider automotive world is watching closely. Brands such as Ferrari, Porsche, Lamborghini, and McLaren all operate in a similar high-control environment, where repair access and technical data are tightly managed. A change in one case could influence all of them. This is why the outcome matters far beyond one garage or one damaged car. It represents a shift in how modern products are owned and controlled, especially as technology becomes more advanced and dependent on software and restricted systems. In the end, the central question remains open and powerful. When you buy something expensive and complex, do you truly own it, or are you only given the right to use it under conditions set by the company that made it? As the pressure builds, this situation begins to feel less like a normal dispute and more like a turning point for the entire automotive industry. What started as a personal rebuild project is now evolving into something much larger, where legal rights, consumer freedom, and corporate control all collide in a very public way. If Alex continues pushing forward, the next stage would likely involve formal legal action, and that is where the real consequences begin. In court, the discussion would no longer be about opinions or assumptions, but about evidence, law, and real outcomes. The manufacturer would need to explain why access to parts, tools, or technical information was restricted, especially when the law clearly supports independent repair rights. At the same time, Alex's completed rebuild would stand as a powerful example that independent repair is not only possible, but also practical when done with skill and planning. This creates a situation where the gap between legal theory and real-world practice becomes impossible to ignore. If the courts side with the owner, it could force companies like Bugatti to change how they operate, especially in terms of how much control they maintain after selling a vehicle. It could also push other major brands such as Ferrari, Porsche, and Lamborghini to reconsider their service and repair policies. Even companies like McLaren, which already operate within tightly controlled service systems, would likely feel the pressure to adapt. However, if the case does not reach a strong legal conclusion, and instead ends quietly, the impact might still exist, but in a more subtle form. Manufacturers could adjust their internal policies without public acknowledgement, making small changes that reduce conflict while still maintaining control in practice. Either way, the situation is already influencing how people think about ownership. It highlights how modern products, especially advanced machines, are no longer simple objects, but complex systems tied to software, data, and restricted access. This means that ownership is no longer just about holding the keys or having legal papers. It is about how much freedom you actually have to use, repair, and control what you bought. This shift is slow, but it is becoming more visible as cases like this continue to challenge long-standing industry behavior. As this entire conflict develops further, it becomes clear that it represents something much deeper than just a legal argument or a technical repair issue. It is slowly turning into a real test of how modern ownership is defined in a world where technology, software, and corporate control are becoming more powerful than ever before. If Alex continues to push this case forward, the final stage would not just be about fixing a damaged car, but about challenging the system that controls how that car is repaired, serviced, and supported after it's sold. In many ways, this is where the idea of ownership is being redefined. Traditionally, ownership meant complete control over an object once it was purchased. You could use it freely, repair it however you wanted, and choose who works on it without asking permission. But in the modern automotive world, especially with highly advanced machines built by companies like Bugatti, that traditional idea is being tested. These vehicles are no longer simple mechanical products. They are complex systems that depend heavily on specialized tools, software access, and controlled networks. This gives manufacturers a level of influence that continues even after the sale is completed. The right to repair law was created to balance this power and restore freedom to consumer. But laws only become meaningful when they are enforced in real situations. That is why cases like this matter so much. If Alex succeeds in proving that independent repair is both possible and legally protected, it could force a shift in how the entire industry operates. It would also send a strong message to other major brands such as Ferrari, Porsche, Lamborghini, and McLaren, showing that ownership rights cannot be quietly limited through technical barriers or controlled service systems. At the same time, even if the case does not end in a dramatic courtroom decision, it still adds pressure to the industry, because public attention and real-world examples of successful independent rebuilds continue to grow. In the end, this situation is not just about one Bugatti or one repair project. It is about whether consumers truly have freedom over what they buy, or whether ownership is slowly becoming something conditional, shaped by the companies that build and control these advanced machines. At this point, the story reaches its most important level, where everything comes together and the real meaning of the conflict becomes impossible to ignore. What began as a simple idea, repairing a damaged luxury car, has now grown into a much larger debate about control, freedom, and the future of ownership itself. If Alex continues forward and fully completes his rebuild, while also preparing for a possible legal challenge, the outcome could have effects far beyond his own situation. It could influence how manufacturers behave, how laws are enforced, and how customers understand what they are actually buying when they purchase a modern car. In today's world, vehicles are no longer just mechanical machines. They are highly advanced systems that rely on software, restricted access, and tightly controlled service networks. This gives manufacturers a level of influence that extends far beyond the point of sale. Even after a customer pays full price and receives legal ownership, the company that built the vehicle can still shape how it is repaired, who is allowed to work on it, and what information is available. This creates a blurred line between ownership and dependency. The right to repair law was introduced to correct this imbalance and ensure that ownership remains meaningful in practice, not just on paper. However, the real test of any law is not how it is written, but how it is applied when strong companies resist it. That is why cases like this are so significant. If the rebuild is completed successfully and stands as proof that independent repair is possible, it weakens the argument that manufacturers must maintain strict control for safety or technical reasons. It also strengthens the position of consumers who want more freedom in how they maintain their property. On the other hand, if manufacturers manage to avoid legal consequences or limit the impact of such cases, it may reinforce the existing system where official networks remain dominant. Either way, the pressure created by this situation is already influencing the industry. Companies like Bugatti, Ferrari, Porsche, Lamborghini, and McLaren are all part of a system that could be affected by how the situation develops. In the end, this is no longer just about one car or one rebuild. It is about whether modern ownership still gives people real control or whether it is slowly shifting into something more limited, where freedom depends on the approval of the companies that created the product in the first place. As the story moves toward its final direction, the weight of everything that has happened becomes even clearer, because this is no longer just about a single rebuild or a single disagreement between a car owner and a manufacturer. It has become a wider reflection of how power is shared in the modern automotive world, especially when it comes to highly advanced machines that depend on complex systems and controlled access. If Alex continues forward, the next step is not simply finishing the car, but facing the consequences of what that finished car represents. A fully rebuilt Bugatti, restored outside the official manufacturer network, is not just mechanical achievement. It becomes a symbol. It shows that independent work can succeed even in a space that is normally considered exclusive, tightly controlled, and reserved only for authorized technicians. This creates a serious challenge for manufacturers like Bugatti because it forces a comparison between what they claim is possible and what has actually been achieved in real life. If a complex hypercar